The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus said to his disciples, "Be watchful, be alert. You do not know when the time will come. It is like a man traveling abroad. He leaves home and places his servants in charge, each with his own work, and orders the gatekeeper to be on the watch. Watch, therefore. You do not know when the Lord of the house is coming, whether in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or in the morning. May he not come suddenly and find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to all, watch." The Gospel of the Lord. When I was in the 7th grade at intermediate school, number 25, Queens, I was enrolled in a ceramics class. This wasn't my idea, but the state of New York determined that I had to have a class in art, and there it was. And now if you ask anyone who knows me, they will tell you that art is not exactly in my set of gifts and talents. But alas, what can you do? There I was. The final project of this class was to make a jar of sorts. So you make two bowls out of clay and you mush them together and you cut them apart again and they sort of fit. It's a thing. I don't know. But more than making a jar, the jar had to look like something. So after carefully examining the shape of these two bowls I mushed together, it looked relatively cylindrical, so I thought, pig. It looks like a pig. I'm going to make it look like a pig. It's going to be my pig jar. And so I gave it some hooves and a snout, some eyes and ears, tail, and covered it in glazed and stuffed it in the kiln with the other 27 students in that class. The next day, so I will admit this, before going into the kiln, it was not that bad. It wasn't great, but it was okay. The next day, what came out of the kiln was truly, quite possibly, one of the most hideous things I've ever seen in my entire life. The glaze had turned into this lovely shade of Pepto-Bismol, and the added definition only seemed to highlight the disproportionality between all the limbs and extremities that I've given the pig. So the hooves and the eyes were the same size, the snout was bigger than them all. One of the ears had blown off in the kiln, which is something that can do if you don't fire it right. It really was hideous. There's not enough words to describe it. And yet, it was mine. It was my one-eared pig. And so I brought it home and put it on the coffee table. And it sat on the coffee table in my house for quite some time. I was quite proud of it, and every now and then my mom would see if she could move it behind a photo or something, or maybe a little bit further back on the end table, and I would just take it and bring it right back and put it on the middle, right there in the middle, for everyone to see. It's still there somewhere. It's not that I didn't know it didn't look great. It is. It's not great. It's ugly. But it's mine. It's the work of my hands. It's the product of my creation. And there's a pride that comes with that. There's an attachment that comes with that. The prophet Isaiah, friends, reminds us today that we are God's clay, that He is the potter, that each and every one of us is a product of God's hands. And though we may sin, and though by sin we have not always turned out as God wishes us to, we, like my jar, are still His. we are still the work of his creation. We are still the work of his hands. And even despite our ugliness, our flaws, our disfigurement at times, that God still loves us. He still cherishes us. He still desires nothing but the best from us and for us, because we're his. Because we are his creation, the work of his hands. It's our trust in this fact, our trust in the fact that despite our flaws, despite our shortcomings, despite our own ugliness through sin, that God is there and that he loves us. It's that trust that makes this Advent season so important to us as a people of faith. Each year, as we wait and prepare to celebrate the coming of Christ at Christmas, our hearts also naturally turn to preparing for that other coming, the one we know that will happen at the end of time, when Christ will gather all things to himself. It's our trust in his promise that he will indeed come, because we're his beloved, because we are his creation. It's our trust in his faithfulness, as St. Paul speaks of this morning, that gives the definition and meaning to our waiting and watchfulness this Advent season. For we wait in the surety and hope that our God has not only come into our world once, but that he will most certainly come again. He even comes to us now in this sacrament, in his word and in his bread and body. We wait, friends, this Advent not with anxiety and worry, but in joyful expectation. We wait with hope. It's not easy for us to do as humans because waiting is difficult. I'm from New York, I know. Our waiting can make us be drowsy. It can help us grow complacent. Our waiting can cause doubt sometimes. We can start to wonder if our waiting of what we wait for is ever going to come to pass. We wonder if that date is ever going to show up, if that package is ever going to come, if that letter is simply going to get lost in the mail and never make it to us. And in the anxiety of that waiting, it's easy for us to doubt, to despair, to give up. We are a people that tends to prefer instantaneous gratification, to have what we want when we want it. And when we can't have it right here and now, it can not only draw our ire and impatience, but it can cause us to wonder. It can cause us to doubt. It can test our faith. It's in that doubt and unsurety that we can grow slack, that our waiting can be passive, that our watchfulness can diminish and our zeal dampen. And so, each year the Church gives us this holy season as an opportunity to refocus on God's promise, to reflect not only on his first coming into the world on Christmas, but to let our preparation for that celebration also remind us of God's fidelity to us, of his promise to come again, of his promise to draw all things to himself. So that if the flame of our zeal has diminished over the course of time, and it often does, we might tend to it a little bit stronger and help it shine a little bit more and even a little bit brighter. Advent reminds us that our watchfulness and waiting is not a passive experience. It's an active one. We don't simply stand idly by waiting for Christ to come to us. We joyfully run towards him, as our collect says. We run towards him, trying to meet him, coming, preparing to see him that day face to face. We don't wait for the off chance that Christ might show up in our life one day. We know he will. And so we prepare. We ready ourselves. We journey towards him. In our celebration of the sacraments, in our life of prayer, in our relationship with Scripture, in our service to one another, we use the tools and experiences of our life to prepare ourselves for his coming again, to prepare ourselves for the fulfillment of his promise, to motivate ourselves to live the life that he calls each and every one of us to live. And so, as we gather around this altar, as we celebrate Christ's promise to gift himself to us and prepare to reflect on the promise of his coming again at the end of time, may our zeal be renewed. May we watch and wait not as people of doubt and despair, but as people of hope and joy. May we let our trust in God's promise motivate us, shape us, form us in our relationships with one another, in our charity, in our generosity, in our zeal for faith. God will come. God will always be with us. May our hearts always be ready to welcome him into our life, so that at the end of time, when he does appear to draw all things gathered to himself and gather all things to himself, he may draw us into his gentle embrace and live with us and remain with us for all time in that kingdom which has no end.